Kate, you have a very revealing, very personal interview with Christine Quinn, who is the Speaker of the New York City Council and who's running for mayor. Tell us about how you got that interview, and secondly, what it meant for you, because you're a person who's dealt with eating disorders yourself, and that's a big topic of what Christine Quinn talked about.
So they came to me with the story, and I think that partly she wanted to tell this story. She has a memoir coming out next month in which she touches on her eating disorder and her alcoholism, and so they wanted to tell it, and she knew and her aides knew that I had written a book, partly about my own experience with eating disorders. Called Going Hungry. I wrote the introduction, which is about my own experience, and then it was a collection of essays by men and women about their experiences with eating disorders.
Was it hard to talk to a public figure about something that she had rarely talked about personally before?
In some ways, it was easier than a lot of the stories I do. I mean, as journalists, we're often asking unpleasant questions, and in this case, they were sort of unpleasant questions. It wasn't easy for her to talk about this. It was still pretty raw and painful, and she had a lot of shame about it, but it was also something where I felt like there was some common understanding, and so it was sort of a positive experience to have that contrast from the stuff that I'm usually asking Christine Quinn about.
One of the things about challenges like bulimia or eating disorders or alcoholism is you think you're the only person. You know what I mean? I thought I was the only 16-year-old girl in the world who had no ability to deal with her mother dying.
Tell us about your own experience with eating disorders and how they related to hers and to the broader population where we see these issues continuing.
So I suffered from anorexia at a couple of points in my life. First when I was about 10 to 13, and then again in college. And it had to do with control and trying to get control of myself, and also a sense of power and excitement that I got from being able to control what I was eating.
So it starts off as a desire to lose weight, but then it becomes very different, something much larger than that.
Exactly. I mean, many people in this society want to lose weight. We're in a society that really values being thin. Lots of people go on diets. But for certain people, dieting, or in the case of bulimia, binging and purging, taps into something very deep, and it becomes kind of a drug. So for Chris Quinn, the experience of eating a lot and then making herself throw up brought her a sense of relief amid the chaos in her household as her mother was dying of cancer. For me, the feeling of being hungry, particularly in college, was a real high, like a drug high, and it kept me awake. I could do my work. I felt like I was having really exciting intellectual and emotional experiences, as you generally do and want to in college. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, eventually the negative effects started happening as well, and I got very depressed, and obviously I was very thin, and my body was really kind of shutting down.
Okay, and a final question. How do you heal yourself when you're suffering from this disease?
Well, I think in many cases, some form of treatment is necessary. For me, I went to therapy, and then at a certain point, my therapist and my parents insisted that I go to the hospital, to an inpatient program where they feed you and there's an amount you're required to eat, because an important part of the healing process is actually regaining weight. You really can't recover emotionally and psychologically if you're still at an extremely thin weight, because it really feeds on itself, and your mind is very narrow, and it's just a very black and white way of thinking in that state. So it's important to refeed and to gain weight, particularly for anorexics, for bulimics, to have a period where they try not to binge and purge and to be in treatment to get support for that. So for me and for many people, going into some kind of intensive treatment and acknowledging that you need help, that this is not something you can take care of on your own, which I really wanted to believe, is very important.
Kate, thanks so much for talking about us.
Thanks for having me.